is it so hard to buy scissors? Rambling about society at a crossroads. I have a feeling that we're at a crossroads as a nation. We're being forced to make a decision, and our answer will shape our collective future. I am, of course, talking about how hard it is to buy scissors. No, that's not a joke. Last night, my youngest son and I popped out to an out-of-town trading estate to pick up a few bits and bobs we needed for about the house. One of the items my wife asked us to get was a new pair of everyday scissors. Nothing fancy, just a simple pair of scissors to open parcels, cut paper, you know the deal. Both my sons love making things, puppets, model railways, all sorts. This means that in our house we probably have an above average number of scissors, but nobody knows where they are because I didn't use them last, or some such reason. This story would be otherwise completely unremarkable if it wasn't for the fact that the task was harder than we anticipated. We popped into Hobbycraft. They have plenty of scissors, but they all appeared to be rather specialist, or at least they were priced that way. All of them were £15 and upwards and had security tags on them, and to be fair, some of them were very fancy fabric scissors and probably worth the £25 plus price tag. I'm sure that they were all very lovely and good scissors in their own right, but I was in the market for everyday scissors, nothing fancy, so we left. We decided to pop next door to TK Maxx, and we were denied before we even made it inside. The manager was obviously keen to go home early because they were locking up early, or at least they were only allowing customers to exit, not enter. Foiled again. Where does a man find everyday scissors in this town? My last effort was the B&M discount store. They were still open, and the store is massive. We were bound to find what we needed there. My son and I wandered up and down the many aisles of the dogleg shop unit, trying to read the mind of the person who'd laid out the display of the shop. We couldn't find scissors anywhere. They were not with the kitchen things, so we went to the office supplies. No joy. When we went round the corner to the kids' craft supplies, there were none there either. Surely this town can't be out of scissors. What was I missing? Fearing that this shop was also going to close on us, I did the least British thing I could think of. I asked the shop assistant for help. I know, desperate times call for desperate measures. It was an older lady who looked at me like I was completely mad. I knew it had been a poor choice. "Aisle 5 for the kitchen stuff," she told me, as if I had asked her where you could find the letter A in the alphabet. Totally humbled, my son and I made our way back to aisle 5 to look again at the shelves to find what we had obviously overlooked the first time. We looked, and we looked, and looked. Nothing. I'd already asked the shop assistant for help once. I wasn't going to risk it by asking her again, so we decided that we'd double-check the office supplies and the craft section one more time on our way back to the front door, as the fault was clearly ours. As we got to the office supplies, I spotted a different shop assistant who was restocking the shelves. I'd already embarrassed myself. What else did I have to lose? "Excuse me, where do you think I could find the scissors?" I asked, braced for the withering response. The lady straightened up and replied in a clipped Eastern European accent, "Behind till 1. They could be dangerous." Then she continued stacking the shelves. My son and I just looked at each other. What kind of scissors were they? I don't know exactly where his mind went in that moment. That's often the case with our youngest. But my mind started to picture military-grade scissors that were being kept under lock and key. Excited by the fact that we were going to be buying some exotic, restricted item, we headed for Till 1 in order to see the contraband. When we arrived at Till 1, it was not as exciting as I had imagined. It was very much like any till point in a B&M store. A bit grubby, vaguely run down, and the wall behind the till was covered in product recalls and health and safety notices sellotaped all over like a makeshift wallpaper. This was not the James Bond experience my overactive imagination had built it up to be. Tucked round the corner, there was a curious selection of items shoved onto a shelf, which I suppose could have been labelled as "could be dangerous" in one way, shape or form. Barbecue accessories, matches, candles, a multi-tool, and, in pride of place in the centre, a triple pack of scissors in a vacuum-sealed packet. £3.50 was the princely sum I paid for these decidedly everyday scissors. On its own, this story wouldn't be very remarkable, and in fact, I'm quite sure you're wondering why I felt it was worth sharing. The truth is, it's just one incident in a long line of things recently. Last month, my eldest son and I were in Boots looking at aftershave. There were no staff anywhere to be seen on the shop floor, and the bloke in front of us casually picked up all the tester pots and headed to the makeup desk near the front doors. I imagined he was going to ask for those little paper tester cards you get to spray the scents on. He didn't. Instead, he just popped them all into a Co-op carrier bag and walked out the door. I was gobsmacked. It was so blatant. The inner shop worker in me looked around for someone to tell. No one. No staff on the shop floor. Madness. I gave my son the usual rant about how selfish the man was. Now we all have to pay for the tester pots that bloke stole. That's how retail works. The more shoplifting there is, the more the prices go up for the rest of us who bother to pay. At the New Year, my sister-in-law, Rowan, was visiting us and we popped into town to pick up some food from the supermarket. She was shocked to see the security tags on all the steaks in the meat aisle in Sainsbury's in our town. Rowan lives in Yica in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and there's a lovely new bingo hypermarket opened there in 2018. It's massive. It sells everything. On my last visit to Yica in 2023, I went into the bingo for some basic breakfast supplies while we were staying there on holiday, and I came out with a VW Combi rolling suitcase and a pair of sliders. Bosnia and Herzegovina may well be considered as a less well-off country than the UK, but they don't have security tags on their meat. This week, the ARC conference is on in London. Society is standing at a crossroads. But which way will it turn? This isn't about turning left or right, politically speaking, but with Reform and the Green Party being the two fastest growing political parties in the UK at present, you'd be forgiven for thinking it was. The question we are faced with is far more fundamental than the mere politics of left or right. This is about, do we all want to pull together to make our nation somewhere where everyone wants to live, or not? It seems like a silly question because the answer is seemingly obvious. Yes, of course I would like to live in a country that I would like to live in. However, we seem to have lost our shared idea of what such a nation might look like. There's been a short-sighted and cynical trend over the past 30 years or so of talking our country down. It started happening when I was at school. In order to appear cool and relevant, the young history teacher would be transgressive and question whether the British Empire had been a force for the good in the world or not, etc. All fun stuff for a schoolboy debate, but all lacking the knockout punch the setup was asking for. We get it. You think our country is flawed and it doesn't have the best track record, but who should we all aspire to be more like? This is the key point our culture is wrestling with right now. We know that our country has a bad history with the slave trade. Unfortunately, almost everywhere does. And it's genuinely horrifying that many countries still do. We know that we have handled the Windrush generation poorly. We know that we're handling the current immigrants poorly. We know that there are countless ways in which we could have acted better as a nation in the past. But our collective outrage at our forefathers falls short in an important way. Who should we aspire to be more like? This is a question that is never answered because we all know the answer. We'd all rather just live here. Which is precisely why we haven't moved anywhere else. You won't find hordes of Brits gathering at dawn on the beaches at Dover, waiting to make their small boats crossing into the free lands of Europe. You don't find plucky young working-class English lads stowing themselves away underneath lorries at the Channel crossings. Why? Precisely because the perception is that life is better here. I will stop short of being fully American in my momentary outburst of love for my own country. I'm not going to declare the United Kingdom to be the greatest country on earth. I'm British, so I'll always struggle to express my love of country in the bold and brash way in which our American cousins seem so fond of doing. This does not mean that I don't think our country is worth loving. I absolutely think it is. So why are so many folks acting in the ways I described earlier? Why is that bloke shoplifting after shaving boots? Why are all the steaks embellished with bright yellow security tags in the supermarket? Why do I have to ask permission to buy scissors from behind the counter? None of these are symptoms of poverty or inequality as such, as the commentators on TV would have you believe. Being poor doesn't make scissors potentially more dangerous. Being criminally minded does. Being poor or a victim of societal inequality doesn't give me an entitlement to take steaks for free. Envy and greed does that. Aftershave tester bottles are not freebies for the poor and needy. They're a calculated risk on behalf of the seller who's operating in a high-trust business model. A model which factors in the cost of that theft into the price of all the other aftershave bottles they sell. The shop won't be out of pocket. We all will. We can't blame the bad behaviour of individuals on their wealth or lack of it. We live in a country where there is plenty of help for those on the margins and those who are unable to make ends meet. I know. I've worked in these areas. I've worked for different charities for the vast majority of my working life. We actually live in a remarkably generous country, both locally and nationally. There are food banks up and down the country which are filled with the generous donations of local individuals and local supermarkets. And despite our government's announcement that it is cutting overseas aid from 0.5% to 0.3% of gross national income, we will still be donating over £9 billion overseas. That's billion with a B. We're a generous people. And so much so, the International Development Minister resigned in February because of these cuts. If we're such a generous country, why are people still stealing? I think part of the reason is that we've forgotten the story of who we are. We've forgotten the values and the stories that made our country worth fighting for, like our grandfathers and our great-grandfathers did. We've forgotten that our country is a rare type of place that people risk life and limb to reach, yet the people who are born here are taught to think poorly of it. It's customary to talk down and to diminish what we've achieved as a nation. When we look back, we only see things to be ashamed of and find no room for gratitude. We presume to be the people who can pass judgment on our forefathers rather than being people who owe them a debt of gratitude. This idea was summed up nicely by Malcolm Guyte recently when he went on the Pints with Aquinas podcast. Matt Fradd said, I think there's a lot of young men in particular who are quite rightly sad about the fact that they feel like they don't belong to a culture, and they want to. Guyte's response, you only think you don't belong because you don't remember. And you don't remember because you've been robbed by the last two generations who stopped remembering the long stories and the old stories, and in fact, story itself. To be a person is to be in a story. We're on Holy Saturday culturally right now. We've had a Good Friday of utter destruction of the sacred and the divine. But Sunday is coming. I love this. Only a storyteller like Malcolm Guyte could make a point like that. Is it an oversimplification to say it's hard to buy scissors these days because we've forgotten how to be grateful? We've forgotten how to be grateful for a culture that was handed down to us simply because we deemed it to be imperfect and old-fashioned. We've forgotten to be grateful we live in a culture where steaks are readily available, even though I write as one who can't afford to buy the steaks myself. We've forgotten to be grateful that we live in a culture where we're fortunate enough to be able to concern ourselves with frivolities like aftershave. It's not exactly an essential item. Have we allowed ourselves to consider the rule of law to be a negotiable factor, such that scissors are no longer seen as harmless tools to cut paper and open parcels? How is any of this progress from what we had before? How is any of this a better story than the one we seem to have rejected? Our generation's collective sense of entitlement has improved nothing, but there is good evidence that things have got worse. Gratitude is a posture we would do well to rediscover as a nation. On a personal level, gratitude is something that is commanded of me as a Christian. It's good for me. The Bible has lots to say about it. I want to be better at being thankful in the circumstances I find myself in, and hopefully you do too. If you've joined me on this ramble about scissors, cultural change and gratitude, thank you. If you have any comments on what I've said, why not leave the comment in the comment section below? And if you think a friend of yours would appreciate reading this, why not send them a link? I hope you can join me again next week for another journey with my thoughts. Grace and peace. P.S. Before I go, this past weekend was my birthday on Friday and my wife's birthday on the Saturday. A very kind friend of us gave us some chocolates, and after having written this ramble, I had to laugh at the security sticker on the box.